So thank you everyone for joining. My name is Justin Wheeler. I am the CEO and founder at Fundraise, which is a technology platform that provides nonprofits with modern front-end fundraising and donor CRM tools. But today we have a special guest, Sarah Lee, who is the Chief Growth Officer at NewStory, one of my favorite nonprofit organizations. They are one of the more innovative when it comes to not just programming, but their fundraising strategy. And so today, we're really excited to interview Sarah to talk about their strategy and overall framework for how they've built NewStory, because it has been a rocket ship. They have grown very quickly over the last several years. And so we're excited to dig into that. Sarah, thank you. Thank you for joining. Really appreciate it. Would you mind just giving everyone just a quick background on yourself and tell us more about NewStory?
For sure. So I joined the NewStory team just over 3 years ago. My background was running a digital marketing agency here in Atlanta. And so came to the nonprofit world with a for-profit background in building brands and marketing and all of those things. And so NewStory, we pioneer solutions to end global homelessness. And so that has meant building homes all around the world for the last 5 years, creating software tools to better our communities, and engaging with donors and brand partners and everyone in between to really bring them on the journey with us. So it's been a lot of fun and excited to break down some of the learnings over the last couple of years with all of you today.
Awesome. Yeah. So I wanted to share one quick resource with all of you. This interview will also be going up on the podcast later today or early tomorrow. But if you go to nonstopnonprofitpodcast.com, it's where we drop a lot of these live Q&A sessions, along with other content, other podcasts that we have recorded and will continue to record. So a great resource. It's all about nonprofits. It's all about growth, fundraising, nonprofit management. And so please check it out and listen to some episodes. This one will be going up on the podcast very shortly. All right, Sarah, again, thank you for joining for the live portion of this for the Q&A. We've got a lot of really great questions. And it was really refreshing to rewatch that. I know that it was just a week and a half ago that we spoke. But, going on to week 6 of being quarantined and hearing that, now more than ever, NewStory is still being innovative and is still pushing forward is super inspiring. And I think it's an inspiring message for all nonprofits during this time, that regardless of the challenge and chaos, to keep pushing forward on your mission. So thank you for sharing that with us so brilliantly. I'm just going to jump straight into the questions because we've got a lot of really good ones. So first one we've got here is, you mentioned big asks and bold, innovative ideas. Are there ways you would recommend translating that to something smaller, like a monthly giving program, membership? For instance, our volunteer base generally can also give only small donation. Same with members, teachers, etc.
So I think with bold ideas and with innovation and attracting donors around that, what people are really looking for is being able to step up, right? Like what the donor is looking for on the other side is the ability to be a hero. And so sometimes that looks like making one of those swing for the fence asks that, hey, we're looking for $1 million for our matching program. And sometimes it looks like just stretching the people that you already have to think about things differently, right? And so with the donors, that could look like, hey, we're asking every one of our donors to get one additional person signed up for our monthly giving program, right? It could look very tangible, but probably not a lot of people are asking them for something that is that tangible, right? And so it stretches them to think about who would be interested in this and how can I do that? I think it's also important to think about the bold ideas and innovations with your team, right? Sometimes we internally will ask ourselves the question, like, if we had to make this 10 times bigger, right? If we were trying to raise 10 times as much money, what would we do different, right? And it's just a really helpful thought exercise to think about scale, take all the parameters and constraints we put on ourselves within solving problems and working with donors, and kind of list those to just help you look at the problem from a different way.
Yeah, that's great. And it also, something to add there, when I was at Invisible Children, our average donor age was 16 years old. So, what's bold to a 16-year-old is very different, to a high net worth donor or, whoever it might be in your kind of ideal donor demographic. But for us, we launched this campaign early on called Try, and it was asking students to give $3 a month. And we saw an overwhelming response across the country to a point where it became $1 million annual program, right? We had high school students giving $1 million a year through $3 a month installments. So I think that like the idea of something being bold doesn't mean the initial action has to be bold or has to be huge. It's when a lot of small things add up to make that aspect bold and big and so forth. So that's one I'd add there. So next question. Interested in hearing about fundraising ideas for organizations whose primary fundraising events have been canceled due to COVID-19 restrictions. Are there any virtual innovations that anyone has used or are planning? Has News Story done anything in particular as it relates to pivoting fundraising strategy and so forth?
We are really kind of in the thick of figuring a lot of that out right now, just like I think everyone else is. So I can share a few of the kind of ideas or things that we have heard from our donor bases that are helpful. So we've heard about things like Peloton classes, right? People gathering their networks to do these Peloton classes that they're paying $10 when they join it, and that's all going to a group. So one of our donors raised like $150,000 for a food bank just by asking his friends, like, hey, you're going to take a Peloton ride anyways, do it with me and make this donation. So thinking about how can we plug into things that people are already doing in a way that makes it a little bit more interesting? Like people are kind of sick of their daily routines right now. So how can we shake that up a little bit without too much difference? We actually have a episode of a documentary that Apple TV did on us that comes out on Friday. And so we had like a 12-city tour planned and all of these things. And so we're working on, okay, how can we switch that into these smaller viewing parties, into Q&As with people, into something that people can really join and feel like they're having a personal connection. And trying to balance that with the idea that a lot of people right now are burnt out on Zoom, right? So how are we balancing staying somewhat outside of the things that everybody feels inundated with, but doing it in a really meaningful way? So I feel like we haven't like hit the nail on like, oh, this one thing has been so super successful for us. But those are kind of a couple of things that we're thinking through.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to move on. Is it okay, morally correct, strategically, to run a fundraising campaign to ensure the survival of the NGO in times when the focus is on health and food for those in need?
If you believe in your cause, then yeah, absolutely. If you believe that your organization needs to be around long-term to serve people, then yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, yeah, you better be making those asks, because otherwise, if the alternative is closing up shop, then that probably doesn't benefit anyone.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's the way I look at it is there is crisis every single day happening all around the world. Some that we're aware of, some that we aren't. And so if you believe in your nonprofit and the effectiveness it can have on society or the community in which you're serving, don't stop. There's nothing unethical about continuing to fundraise to keep your organization afloat, especially if it is having and can continue to have significant impact, post COVID-19 world. So keep your head up and don't stop fundraising. Okay, next question. Is it okay? We just actually answered that one. What if the board is afraid or reluctant to embrace bold or innovative ideas? I've got some thoughts on this after you.
Ooh. I love the idea in anything, whether board, team, somebody from the outside, thinking about what matters to them and figuring out how you can get a win-win with whatever you're trying to push, right? And so if what matters to your board is ensuring you don't have mission drift and keeping things the same and all of that kind of stuff, how can you take a bold idea and position it in such a way that they can take a first step and they don't have to commit to the whole thing, right? And so, for example, for us with the 3D printing project, we did not go to our board and say, hey, we want to invest millions of dollars in this community in Mexico as step one, right? Because that probably would have been irresponsible. We said, hey, we have this big idea. We want to start with one home, and we feel it's irresponsible not to try because what could happen long-term, right? And so if you can position it in such a way that they can make one yes, and then you can use that information and what you learn to go something, bigger, even more innovative down the line, I think that it's going to serve you well. And I think that, those are kind of the main things I think I would say.
Yeah. So to add to that, I would say, and I'm passionate about this topic because I've been on both sides of both as a board member and as a nonprofit executive. Nonprofit executives, you are responsible for casting the vision. You're responsible for setting the tone and the vision for the organization. That should be set. So as you develop a board, as you invite new board members on, they understand how bold your ideas are, what you're trying to accomplish, ending homelessness, global homelessness. In my case, we were helping smuggle North Korean refugees out of China into Southeast Asia. Not every board member wanted to sign up for that because there were implications if you had business in China and so forth. But it was our mission, and it was why we started doing what we were doing. So if the board can't get behind the idea and it's connected to an outcome that your vision and mission have to do in order to succeed, I would say that it's time to have a serious conversation with those board members to ensure that they understand what you're trying to accomplish. Board members are responsible, from a fiduciary perspective. And so there is that, obviously, that responsibility. But board members should not be slowing down what you want to do from the vision perspective of the organization. Okay, communicating with donors. How can you tell them concretely where their money went when the work we focus on is leadership and life skills through sports and arts? So it's an organization, it sounds like, they're doing like mentorship. And so they're asking like, how can you be transparent? Like there's not like a specific program or like building a house, for instance. So how do you be transparent around where the funds go through that sort of program?
Yeah, I would think about what metrics do you have and where are you sending that money that you can build a story around? So based on kind of what I'm imagining the program is, I would think about how could we report to people monthly on what programs we did that month? What is the age breakdown of the children that we serve? What is the sex of the children? Do we have average income of the types of families we're serving? Really just anything you can bring in to bring it to life for people. I think that for us, our transparency in it is very tangible, which is helpful, but really what people are looking for is a connection. So how can you build that connection with the information that you do have? And maybe it's as simple as, a monthly or weekly story of impact that's highlighting one specific program that recently happened or something like that, that really just makes it tangible for people.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, we had a very similar challenge when I was at Liberty in North Korea, where our goal wasn't to rescue as many North Korean refugees as possible. Our goal was to see the North Korean people, bring freedom to their own country. And so how does rescuing a North Korean refugee, removing them from their country, actually assist in that end goal of the organization of seeing a free North Korea? And it was the connection that these North Koreans had back to their families, like speaking with them and so forth. And so it took us about 2 years to really develop and understand the impact a defector had back home. And once we started telling that story, the individuals that were more skeptical and in rescues impacting the overall, freedom of the North Korean people inside the country, it became much more clear. And so it does take research. It takes understanding, how does the impact we're making today relate to the overall theory of change that we've set up as an organization? Does it relate back to it? And being able to draw those points. So very good thoughts there. Thank you, Sarah. I heard a lot of people, so this is a smaller nonprofit that heard you talk about marketing, tech, fundraising teams. This is a team of 5 people. And so any tips for small nonprofits to innovate and create while providing continuation of services? It often feels like we're building the car as they were driving and don't have access to the same resources, manpower, and connections as larger organizations.
Absolutely. So when I joined News Story, I was the 5th employee. And so I can very much relate to being a tiny team, figuring it all out and building it as you're going. My advice would be to lean really hard on tools and technology that already exist, right? So things like Fundraise, a couple other, really specific things that I think will help people. I'm trying to think of the main ones that we used when it really was everybody doing everything. Canva is a great one for just design assets, getting people things that look good pretty easily. Persist is a good email communication tool that kind of lets you set up some automated things that we found really helpful. Zapier was our like best friend back in the day, right? How can we take things that live in a lot of different places and have them all go in one place and easily communicate to each other without having a tech team, without having people who had the time to really go through each of those resources. So yeah, I would just say when it is, less people doing more things, lean on the tools and technologies that are already out there that will give you time and resources back to be able to have as much impact as you can.
That's great. And something to add on that as well, I think a lot of nonprofits, focus on these like financial ratios of how much are we spending on program versus overhead. And this, it's hard to grow a nonprofit. It's hard to grow a business if you can only spend 25, 30% of a dollar on actual overhead. And so I think when you're a smaller nonprofit and you're delivering impact and you have a program and you want to scale it, sometimes it takes the conscious decision to say, you know what, we're going to invest more in operations this year. We're going to invest more in resources and infrastructure so that we can scale up our impact in year 2, 3, and 4. Right. So I think it's also aligning the way we invest the capital that has been given to us as nonprofits in like not just a 12-month period, but in a 36-month and a 48-month period to understand like where are we trying to get, what impact are we trying to achieve the next 5 years. Sometimes it requires investing more in infrastructure, or as New Story does, they have private donors covering their operations so that they could scale both their operations and programs, in the ways that make sense to them. Someone asked, and I think we answered it in the comments, but in case I know it's a question on here as well, is could you just define real quick the 100% model, what that means to New Story?
Yeah, so it means that our donors are either giving to our operational expenses or to our program expenses. And so we have totally separate bank accounts and balance sheets to track both of those things, and the money is never in one place.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, our impact is hard to prove without tracking over several years. We are able to point to research that proves the concept. Are there any ideas on how we continue to engage and excite people when we can't give individualized reports?
I would say kind of similar, same advice in terms of really relying on the stories. I think that what people love about impact programs is it brings the work to life. And so you may not be able to bring the work to life with a ton of impact, but you could take one specific story or evidence point to the change that you can really rely on that and really just build that up to make it real for people and give them something to connect to. Great.
Thank you. Okay, so for transparency with the donor, how do you protect your clients that you are serving when sharing the tangible proof of what you're doing?
Yeah, so that is actually something we are in the thick of right now because we, on Friday, are launching our first US-based project. And so this has brought a whole new group of how are we communicating? Typically with our international work, we're connecting them directly with a family. We're not able to do that with our US work. And so we are in the thick of figuring out this tangible proof piece. So where we're starting with this as just a very MVP is collecting all of the information and literally just having Google Sheets breaking down where are we making the transfers to, what's the high level data on the people being impacted by those transfers, at what velocity are the donations coming in. So essentially just making sure that we're being as transparent as possible about everything going on, even though we don't have the long-term impact yet. We don't have all the details that we have in our normal work, but how can we kind of aggregate what we do have so people feel involved and they feel like they can really trust what's going on.
This was a real challenge for us at Liberty North Korea as well, because the North Korean government actually has this 3-generation policy where if a North Korean leaves the country, they will punish up to 3 generations of their family in political prison camp. And so, when we say we've helped 1,000 North Korean refugees, you can't share that person's, story, their face, pictures, and so forth, because you're putting family members back home in jeopardy. And so we came up with a lot of creative ways to still bring that transparency to our donors, especially donors who are funding, individual rescues or entire missions, where we would have the individuals write or ask if they could write thank you notes, take pictures from behind, take pictures of their shoes after their journey, which are super muddy and dirty, just to show like physical evidence that this thing happened, but the people that you help, just identity can't be revealed. And it actually gave us, for lack of better words, a marketing edge over a lot of, because it's different, it's unique. And it's like, why can't this person show their face? It's a conversation starter. So sometimes you can use these challenges to your favor when it comes to marketing and fundraising, to draw more like intrigue and so forth.
I love that.
All right. So a few more questions here. Do you guys have a framework for branding monthly recurring programs? What did you find worked versus did not work well for your team?
Yeah, so we are actually launching our first recurring program that's focused on all levels of donors on Friday. So our current recurring models are once a year donations, and they're anywhere from $10,000 to $100,000 donations. And so on Friday, we're launching the kind of any donor level. And so kind of combining what we've seen with all of those, I would say the biggest thing is really putting a wrapper around it. So for us, that means naming it and branding it. That has been really beneficial, and people feeling like they're part of something, more so than just the organization, but they know their specific role within the organization. And so having a brand around it, communicating to those people specifically because of the type of donor they are, helps build that. And then, pulling them in for advice and kind of what they can do as a member of that program, I would say are some of the kind of key things that come to mind off the top of my head.
Awesome. Thank you. And just to kind of reiterate that, I think the recurring donor programs that I've been a part of building, have the ones that have done well, it's when there's like they're branded, right? It feels more like a subscription, right? Everyone's used to subscribing to something. So it's a subscription to the nonprofit, and in return I'm getting maybe exclusive access to content, or, strategy, vision, and so forth. These are things that typically help drive adoption for recurring donor programs as well.
And that one thing I'll add is that you don't have to overcomplicate it. So hopefully none of our donors are watching right now, but we generally use the same communication through all of them. It's just rebranded for the different groups. And so don't feel like you have to hire a whole new team to run a program, right? Figure out what are you already doing that you can just re-leverage for these other groups.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a good point. We like to overcomplicate things, don't we? And this is a good question that relates to your 100% model. If you keep the accounts separate for programming versus operations, would you put a teacher's salary in programming, accounting, and or admin in operational? So maybe as it relates to you guys, people on the ground that are helping build the houses, is that operation? Is that program? How do you guys classify that in your guys' bookkeeping?
Yeah, it's a good question. So when we started, we were like 100%, like they're completely separate, right? So literally everything other than building supplies, local labor is operations. So our team, that the work cannot happen without our team, obviously, right? Our programs team, all of that comes out of our operational expenses. Right now, even our local on the ground project managers and those people come out of our operational expenses. Now, that's what we do. I don't know that's what I would advise because as we've grown, we've seen, of course, those numbers grow a lot, and we can't do our work without those people, right? And so really over the last 6 months, we've been questioning that a lot internally in terms of, is that actually right? Or is that homes cannot be built without that cost? So should that be a line item in our operational costs? I think that there's no right or wrong. The right is being extremely transparent, whichever way it goes. So on our home side, we actually break line by line home costs down, right? And so if at some point we decide we want to include on the ground project management costs, we would now have a line item that says on the ground project management costs. And I don't think anybody would question it. What people question is when they feel like you're being shady about it. So I think as long as you could just own the transparency and communicate clearly one way or the other, there's no right or wrong answer.
So this has to deal with like the framework that you guys use to test your ideas and concepts. Basically, what's the process and how do you prevent people from taking what's discussed personally, right? So if someone has like a big idea, I imagine like in your guys' case, best idea usually will win. So, how do people not walk away from the meeting feeling like their ideas weren't heard or feelings hurt? Do you guys have anything in place around that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say we have like a perfect framework for it or anything like that. I would say as a whole with our meetings, we like try to make them very like blame and people free. So instead of saying, like, Justin, I really didn't like that idea, I think that X, Y, and Z would be better, focusing it more on my concern with doing X, Y, and Z is that we wouldn't be able to ABC, right? And so really focusing the conversation more on the ideas, the long-term impact of them versus specific people within them, I think is one thing that's just more helpful for those conversations as a whole. But in terms of the framework, for us, it's really more long-term. So it's less of, do we like this idea in this conversation, and really try to figure out what is the long-term data that we can put around it, whether that's from us or outside resources, to determine if we should move forward or not.
Great. Thank you. So it looks like we are a little over on time. So we're gonna pause there. We've recorded these questions and we'll share it with everyone that has participated along with the recording. So Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to first be interviewed and then to be here for the Q&A. I've seen a lot of really positive comments and it was helpful and useful. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights with the greater nonprofit community.
Hey, I think we are all in this together, and it's just different people's experience. So happy to help. Always kind of here for questions that people may have or places that News Story might be able to help, and look forward to seeing all the work all of you are doing.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. And for those of you on, next week, we'll be back at 11 Pacific Standard Time. This time, our guest will be Victoria Harrison, who is who was the former Chief Creative Officer at Charity Water and now the founder of the Branded Startup. And we're going to be talking with Victoria about how to communicate during times of crisis within your team, to your donors, and to the broader community. And so that will be next week's conversation. More information coming shortly online about that. But thank you everyone for participating today. We appreciate it, and have a wonderful rest of the week.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.